Okay, good afternoon from me as well. Gentlemen, nice to meet you.
Oh man, yeah.
That's right.
I tried.
It's also my job to introduce you. I will do that in a second. I'll first introduce this happening a little bit. My name is Hans and I will not actually interview these four men, but I'll try to facilitate some kind of interesting conversation, and the conversation will mostly take place here, which also means that it involves you. Let me ask you first a few short questions, and all you need to answer them is your right hand. You all have your right hand. Please raise your right hand. Thank you. Okay, that works. Who of you managed to get here? Yes. Okay. Who of you is still alive? Yes. Oh, we're getting there.
Excellent evidence-based.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Then my last question. Who of you managed to go on a vacation with friends and come back with at least as many friends as they left with? Okay, cool. This is a very short exercise to prove that you're all very capable of dealing with complexity. So you have very much practical knowledge, so you're very wise people in dealing with complexity. So why am I saying this? It's because I will ask questions here in this conversation. But in the very likely event that you come up with a question that is even more interesting than the one you've just heard, you're obliged to ask that question. Do we have an agreement on this? Okay, cool. Because that will guarantee that this conversation will be as useful as possible for you, because that's the main purpose. I cannot predict what I need to ask to make it as useful as possible for you. I need your expertise and your wisdom involving the system. It's called, I presume. So that's for now. The introductions, and I'm still doubting, gentlemen. Should I read or should I ask you the question, what would you like me to know about you before we get started? Would you like me to read or would you like to have them?
No, we don't read.
It's better to read because I think we all truly believe you're completely magnificent.
So let me start out with Mr. Philip de Rink.
I don't.
Welcome.
Aside from Robert, but we already know him very well.
Yeah, okay. So, Mr. Philip de Rink, welcome. Thanks for being here. Mr. de Rink is currently full professor in public administration at the University of Ghent, which is a big job considering the complexity environment he's working in. At the Faculty of Economics and Business Administration, am I right? Okay. His fields of research are mainly focused on management of local government and the study of local networks and citizen participation. He was engaged in nearly all the initiatives to develop a framework for human policies in Flanders. So if you talk about living memory, here it is. He worked as a practitioner and a public administrator before returning to the academia. So both practical and theoretical knowledge and scientific background. He combines his academic research with close interactions with field workers, topic you talked about, and public organizations, and with coaching of organizations and complex projects and processes in the public sector. He's convinced of the importance of a strong and resilient public sector, but also of the urgency of adapting the public sector to a rapidly changing environment, of which the renaissance of the commons is an important game changer. Let's be honest, I took this from another website and I mildly adapted it, so I'm not the author. Next to him is Gert de Roo, one of the founding fathers of what you're experiencing right now. Full professor in spatial planning, head of the Department of Spatial Planning and Environment at the Faculty of Spatial Sciences. Am I right? University of Groningen, of course, where he's also part of the research program called Towards Wellbeing, Innovation and Spatial Transformation. Sounds like a very interesting field to be doing research in. He's editor-in-chief of In Planning and past president of ASOP. considered to be the founding father of this work group. He's responsible for various fields of research, all of which related to decision-making concerning purposeful interventions within the physical environment. Most of his research and publications are focusing on decentralization processes, in particular those concerning physical and environmental planning. In his research, he takes the stance the world develops non-linear, which is interesting considering this conference, and is dynamic and is to be seen as complex. His books include, maybe interesting for you to read after this conversation, A Planner's Encounter with Complexity, Complexity and Planning Systems, Assemblages and Simulations, and Spatial Planning in a Complex, Unpredictable World of Change. And there are many more, of course.
This is enough.
Anything I've forgotten that you really wanted to know? Okay. So, feel free to add. The invitation is also open for you. And then Mr. Luc Boelens, since 2012, already full professor of spatial planning and mobility of the Center for Mobility and Spatial Planning, AMRP, at University of Ghent. Before that, also professor at the University of Utrecht, correct? Opinion leader and author of various books and articles regarding the actual relational approach of urban planning, governance, and design. His recent research focuses on the institutional rearrangements, co-evolution in decision-making, and adaptive governance in especially the Euro Delta. You're actually in it? No, not. Yeah, okay. Of Rhine, Meuse, and Scheldt, the three main rivers based on actor network theories, post-structural.
500 meters from here.
Yeah. So, post-structural geographies were in the middle of your research, actually. And common pool resource management. One of your main books is The Urban Connection and Actor Relational Approach to Urban Planning. And you also co-wrote with Gert. Is Gert? Yes. Oh, sorry. When I was writing this, I told myself I should remember that he's on stage, and I forgot. So, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. So they co-wrote the article "Planning of Undefined Becoming," which is a beautiful, even poetic title. First Encounters of Planets Beyond the Planet. Sounds like a Star Trek episode. But you also worked in the field, meaning you worked as strategic planner and a project leader on big projects, large governance projects, infrastructural projects in the Netherlands, and you also were the head of an urban planning firm, Urban Unlimited, based in Rotterdam. Am I right?
Still is.
Still is. You still are. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, let's get started, shall we? All right. Gentlemen, my first question usually is in conversations, what are your best hopes from our conversation? But I'll leave that out. I'll ask you another question. What are you currently learning yourself or discovering yourself about dealing with complexity?
Well, as I've already said, I'm not a spatial planner, so I'm not perfect. But
which is perfect for this conference.
Yeah, but it's interesting to see that the keynote could have been also the keynote in the seminar on public policy.
Okay.
While the notion planning was never on the slides, I think. That's interesting to see. It's a first observation. And the second one is that we need definitely more interdisciplinary dialogue and discussion, I think, between public policy, public administration, planning theory, and so on. And by this I mean that also in our research, you see the discussion about networks. I have here a standard book on managing uncertainties in networks. And that is in fact summarizing the whole idea of this keynote. So the discussion about networks and managing networks, and if is it manageable? Are networks manageable? The discussion is already going on for more than 40 years now in public administration, and comes very close to the pragmatic vision. You quoted Chris Ansel. And I have another standard book here on Handbook on Governance, edited by Chris Ansel. And I want only to say that if he's introducing the book, by the first chapter is about theoretical foundations of governance. So understanding governance arrangements was very close to understanding the settings of different actors with different frames, different stakeholders, complex processes, and so on. And for understanding governance, we need 7 things, he said. Public law, democratic theory, what are the discussion about democracy related to this topic. The third one is state theory. Planning theory is only one of the 7 theoretical foundations we need. Public management theory, organization theory, and collective action theory. Yeah, but so if you read those 7 chapters, then you are able to understand complexity.
And my first question is, if you talk about this, then it's natural to ask, how come we're not even in a bigger mess than we are right now?
Yeah, but one of the questions, and that's also a common point in the discussion in spatial planning literature and in public administration literature, is the added value of the concept of complexity. And even now, after the keynote, I'm not the first one who entering this discussion, and maybe it's a boring discussion for you, but still it is, what is complexity? Is it a common word to indicate what you are discovering when you are leaving your technocratic, rationalistic point of view and you are confronted with the real world? And then you say, how? Complexity? Is it a theory? And what kind of theory is it, in fact? Or is it a meta-theory? And what does the notion meta then means? And also in our public administration discussion and public policy discussion, we have the same. I quote Christopher Pollitt, one of the most eminent public administration scholars, who said the whole discussion about complexity is a wordy discussion. It's about words. Okay. But it doesn't add anything to what we already know. Notions about self-governance, for instance, were already used in the 50s, in 1950. About system theory. We had a whole development of system theories in the years 1950, 1960. So what is, in fact, at this moment, the added value of using a new concept as complexity?
So that's the latest kind of thing that you're working with around complexity right now.
Yeah. Meeske said that spatial planning in Flanders is an example of complexity. Well, that remains to see. The basic statement could also be that if you are able to understand the basic patterns behind the spatial planning, and if you are able to understand the basic political networks who drive spatial planning, it's quite simple. But you have to make the effort to understand and to analyze a certain system, and that could be a difficulty to do.
Okay.
So maybe it says more thing about the laziness of researchers than about the real world.
Okay, okay. Yeah. I'll keep that in mind, but I see some responses already, but I want to direct my question again. What are you currently learning or discovering about this whole complexity thing that you've been working with for so long?
It's probably a completely different response than Philip has, because if you say, look, in the 50s we were already talking about this and that, and we should know, and we are still unaware, and whatever, it will be the death of anything. Because Heraclitus, 300 years before Christ, was already talking about flows. Come on, that sort of is complexity. So does it mean that because of Heraclitus, this whole debate is already, something of the past? That would be the silliest thing. I think what is really essential, and this is what I'm working on as well, is thinking through a different mindset. The functional era. We are from the 20th century. That is a functional century. We are all, well, which I share with my students, we are all cubes. We think linearly. It's in our genes. No matter how deeply we are involved in complexity, it's in us. 100 years of, well, that we have behind us is made us think straightforward. We are all, I'm Dutch, so I'm even worse than most of us, thinking in solutions, and we've solved it already before the question has even come to an end, which is of course ridiculous, but that's us. Which means that you have to go back to, I think, to me, the essence, which is the mind frame you're using to perceive the world. And of course, I see from a technical rationale perspective also complexities and whatever, but I'm confronted with the concept that the world is not helping me in that respect, solving the issues. Definitely, there is still something else going on. Well, in planning, we have another mind frame since 30 years, that's the collaborative paradigm, where we come to agreed realities. So if we don't know what to do, we come to consensus, and there we are, we continue again. Therefore, it's not just about uncertainty and solving it through uncertainty, because you come to an agreement and you have generated your new certainty. The thing is, though, that you can't do something with it the moment the world starts transforming in crisis, because then your expectations, which you drive on, every human lives because of expectation, that makes you make your next move, is suddenly no longer there. And the fun is, and I think that's what Robert has been pointing out in his presentation as well, is that anticipation is fine, it gives you an idea, but you have to be prepared for change, and what Robert so nicely said, also for risks. And that changes the things. And what I'm trying to do in my work is, and I'm really honest with it, going deep to find the essence of the reasonings, because I do think it's not entirely intuition as the answer. There are principles indeed, and these principles, who are these? What are these? And finding these principles help me in abstraction to interact with the community about how to see their daily problems.
Okay.
And if I'm there, I'm fine.
If I'm correct, I see the differences. Also, they're not quite in opposition, as you say, because you also say, this work we're doing requires effort, and a lot of effort, and, maybe complexity is used as an excuse to be lazy. We should avoid that kind of stuff. That's, if I summarize it quickly, could I do it like that? But you say, well, even if we accept complexity as a real thing, it's still hard work to keep working with it.
We have to negotiate with everyone. First, deconstructing our ideas we are born with, and trying then to reconstruct new ideas which match up with nonlinear thinking, and then see the differences, and then the world suddenly looks completely different.
And even within that realm, it still makes sense, as for scientists, as for anyone else, to look for patterns and predictive knowledge in a decent way. If it's there, why stop looking for it? Okay. Yeah. Look, and for you, what's your latest
insight?
Insight or
about complexity?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not so much a complexity thinker, I would say.
Okay. So, what's your latest insight, which could be of interest for this conversation?
Lots of insights, of course. But when I was first confronted with complexity, everyone said, "Oh, everything is complex," and when everything is complex, then it is the same for me. So why should I bother? Mm-hmm. And I always try, and for some parts I agree with Philip de Rink that it's partly about words. But I always try to link it to practical things, because I'm a practitioner. Mm-hmm. I think spatial planning is practice, and that's why I think it is something different than, for instance, policy management, or for instance social management, or sociologist research, or political analysis. We always try to do something, to add something, to have an instrument to realize things, or to avoid things. So and when I went from the Netherlands to Flanders, when I was in the Netherlands, I did my inaugural lecture in 2004, and I said something about going from the space of places to the space of flows, and to make not a planology but a flowology or something like that. So dealing with networks. And when I came to Flanders, my first lecture was I'm going to relaxed metropolis.
The relaxed metropolis.
A relaxed metropolis, yes. Because The Netherlands was, you have to do this, you have to do that, you can't do this, you can't do that, and here oh man. We can go everywhere. But that makes it very important to be very strict, to give exact solutions for exact developments. So when there's now BRV, a new spatial plan for Flanders, released last year, where the minister said, okay, we are going for finalization for every extension in Flanders every more. We have no spool anymore. We will go to zero.
We'll fix the whole deal.
We fix the whole thing. And then there was the architect of Flanders who said, okay, hooray, we have won, yes, for extension. And then the Bond for Beter Leefmeer, the guys from the environmental affairs said, hooray, we have won. But when you look very specifically to what is happening, it's not going to happen, it is business as usual. And if you want to deal with that, just a small thing to say, okay, we don't expand anymore. It is very, very complex to manage that and to instrument that, and it is, and I can't oversee a general rule of what is happening next. So I can only do that at least. I'll give you right, experimenting, testing, learning, but then you say something about the truth. And I'm not sure what the truth is.
Yeah, no.
And the only thing I can be sure about, I like to be that comes resilient of that or something like that.
Okay.
Is that answering? No, it's not
That's an
answering.
answer to. I only know what question I have asked when I hear your answer. That's the answer. Let me throw something in the middle here. If it's not about solving the puzzle, right? I heard, you have these big things coming at you and continuous reforms and all this kind of stuff that you will not completely understand. And in one way you say it's not about, figuring out the solution as a whole and then just implement it, which is consultant lingo to start with. Then what is this work that we're doing about? If it's in public management, if it's in urban planning, if it's in what you also do, Robert, in your line of work, what is it about if it's not longer about trying to understand how everything works and solving the puzzle?
For me, it is solving the puzzle, but which kind of puzzle? You've got not one puzzle. I've got 1,000 puzzles. I'm now in, for instance, in the conversation about the Toekomstverbond, the future alliance of the Oosterweel connection. I was only yesterday. No, that was the finalization of the ring around Antwerp. Big mess. Policy wanted something. There was a referendum. All the people didn't want it. So then they start all over again. It's going on for 20 years, 25 years, something like that.
It's very expensive and nothing.
A very expensive thing. So only in one meeting yesterday morning, there were at the table, only one meeting for one step. There were at the table something about 10, 15 puzzles. And perhaps we can solve one of them, then I'm happy. So I think it's still the case. It is planning. It is still solving the puzzle in some way.
Well, I think there is a lot more. I think planners were extremely good in differentiating reality. You have simple problems, you have complex problems, you have highly complex problems, and we know perfectly well how to deal with them the moment we labeled a problem as simple or highly complex. Simple, technical rationale, highly complex, you start talking to each other, and you better first come to agreements, consensus and so forth. There's hardly a discipline which is so good in differentiating issues, but also able to explain that if you choose for a certain direction, what then to do and what then the consequences can be. Which means that our discipline is strong in explaining to politicians, explaining to civilians, what the possibilities are and the consequences that might come up at the horizon. Now, we have another approach as well, the complexity approach, which includes time, which includes nonlinear reasoning, which is really fair, in particular if you have projects which are not simple, not highly complex, but are in a flow, are in a process where you don't know where it will end to. The duck, Peter Allen referred to. You throw it, indeed, first couple of meters, it's straightforward, but then you cannot predict where it will go. And these problems are there as well. So if you're capable of understanding a trajectory in case you run into these kinds of problems, what then to do, how then to respond, or at least tell your audience, we have no idea where this will lead to, that is an asset. That's crucial, because otherwise you're basically lying to your people and promising things that are totally unfair.
It's basically an ethical matter.
And it becomes ethical. It's a moral issue in that respect.
You also want to...
Still, there are simple problems. And not all the cases of spatial planning need that complexity approach.
But that's the last thing I would say.
No. I don't say that you are saying this, but to make the distinction, there are a lot of problems who are quite simple. And tomorrow you go to the Overpoort, one of the neighborhoods here in Ghent. That's an interesting case. Why do you use complexity theories to such a case? There are different frameworks, there are different stakeholders, of course, there are different powers at stake, but I would not call this an example of complexity theory, or where you can apply your principles of learning and adaptive governance. I would not apply it to that type of cases. But there are some cases where your approach, you need the approach of adaptive governance, of flexibility in the management, and that is what we are trying to do also in studying networks. That is not an instrumental view on networks. That's about constructing frames, discussing frames, using uncertainty as a resource also to bring together some stakeholders, taking some risks at some times, but also introducing planners who can introduce some innovative ideas in the process. And that is also the function of a planner. Be innovative, be creative, but he has also be adaptive to the political environment in which he is working, she is working.
Just to clarify this, can you give an example of a situation where this complexity approach was used, where you think simplicity was more in place, was more the proper thing?
80% of what spatial planners are doing in Flanders are in fact dealing with simple problems, but with a lot of discussion sometimes, and of course, planning a new town hall, developing some public space in the center of the city. I call this, could be interesting, but not complex problems in the sense that you are...
When do you notice that it becomes...
But what is for you a complex problem in Flanders at the moment? No one?
But what do you say?
What is at this moment a complex problem in Flanders?
I don't know.
Spatial planning.
I don't know.
For instance, the air travel routes of the national airport or something like that?
Yeah, but what is then complexity? Is it complexity about the institutional context? That is a very complex case. Is it complexity about the number of stakeholders? That's a very complex case. Is it, what is it? What is complexity in this kind of case? That's my central point. But of course it is about, it is discussion, it is conflict between a lot of stakeholders. But what is the added value of complexity theory in such type of cases? That is my key question. And I don't see it. I see that you need public policy analysis and you need the analysis of power balances in cases and all what you want. You all need it to open the discussion about the role of the planners in such type of processes. But that's it. That's enough.
I don't agree at all. You know, that a bridge...
It's about learning, it is about adaptive networks, it is about managing networks, it is about creating networks that can handle those topics. Okay, that's it. That's very interesting, that's difficult, and that is what we have to do. Okay, well, go on.
Well, just in response and in question of that, if it's about managing networks, automatically you're into a social complexity because you're dealing with human beings.
Of course. That's
So
part of the management.
That's where the complexity lies.
Of course, and that's part of the management. Management is not an instrumental technique. Management is about managing frameworks also, about managing framing, about managing knowledge, about managing uncertainties at some moments, about managing risk, about managing balances between actors.
I think what I'm trying to come to is questioning the truth or the viability of using a management frame on things that are ostensibly uncertain, i.e. how an actor will act in a certain situation. How do we know how Trump was going to act? Who is managing Trump? I dare say there's a few people who are having some impact now because he's not tweeting as much. But I think that's the question. How do you manage something that's fundamentally so uncertain?
Can I just ask you, are you talking about managing or controlling? Because I think you're talking about two types of management.
I'm not sure. I suppose it brings me to the question: what is managing? And I suppose I'm thinking that there's all sorts of things that, when it comes to working with human beings, and I come from an organisational development kind of background, so and change management and things like that, and so it doesn't take much. You can try and manage, but people will just go off script and will dig their heels in and not do this and not do that, and all of a sudden you're not managing anything much. You're just holding on.
But before you start managing, you try to think through what kind of issue you're dealing with. The moment you believe that you're pretty sure about the situation, and indeed the issue is simple, you try to manage to maximize your goals. If the situation is completely uncertain, but you can get there through reaching consensus, your route will be process optimization. If the situation is such that the context is highly turbulent and you might expect change along the way, then you try to manage with non-linearity, but trying to avoid, for example, too harsh negative effects, and you're trying to promote the possible positive effects. So your attitude will change depending on an estimate of the situation.
And that is management, in my view.
Yeah.
So management is not about engineering or steering or control and command. Sometimes it could be. Sometimes in the process it could be useful that there is a moment of command and control. But managing is also reflecting of your own role. That's also management.
Yes, and I suppose, but when it comes back then to reflexivity, who is being reflexive in a large kind of program?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
Well, maybe some of this sort of taps in with the question I'd asked about how are we actually defining what we mean by complexity. And I think that for me, in any event, if the terminology is to be useful, then it has to mean something specific that gives you different kinds of tools than sort of just traditional planning tools. And I sort of wonder whether sometimes things tend to slip away from, the term in the sciences refers to systems that can complex adaptive systems in the sciences, self-organized from bottom-up agents that are still on a trajectory to find optimum regimes in which to settle. And then the question to me is then how do you manage those kinds of regimes that are not following linear trajectories but have multiple capacities to emerge?
The question.
I just wonder. I just wonder whether the terminology, when the word complexity moves too far away from how it has been useful in the sciences, whether then we kind of get into, oh well, this is just a word, or complicated.
I think you're right. And the point earlier, you know, in a sense, I see a lot of that sort of question. It goes back to this, is that Edgar Morin short piece on restricted versus general. And it's that object of sort of restricted. You've got a range of tools, you know, network modeling, agent-based modeling, various other processes that you can sort of put into a complexity box and say, okay, here's the methods that we can use, we can apply them to certain situations, and we can bound off certain phenomena or processes as fundamentally orderly, where we can apply clearly predictive modeling frameworks, etc. And you can bound off those bits and say, you know what, those bits. And in a way, I was thinking of a hospital model. Again, I go back to my friend. He says, hospital. If you break your leg, the structure, or arms or bones, the structure, the way the hospital is organized, is almost like a Fordist factory production, because the process is real. X-ray, plaster, and boom, you can almost time them exactly as the process going in. So you can set up orderly structures. You can collect really good data, flow through, numbers in, numbers out. You can model that really, pretty well. You can then add in a little bit of complexity if you want to add some agent. Well, how do the agents come in? How do we get the actors to do various things? So, if you will, there. Then you can go to other parts of the hospital where you're coming in with elderly with multiple morbidities, different things. You're not sure what the thing is. You're having to take a lot more resources, a lot more time to figure out what's going on with that actor. You're into a much messier situation. You have to develop different strategies and different approaches to that because you're dealing with a fundamentally more complex process. So if you will, those are all aligned within the same institutional structure. What it gets back to your point in particular is to say, and this is where I tend to be, it's this bridging thing that I like. I actually think, yes, there are defined processes, complex adaptive systems that have been identified by various scientists, as you say, and I agree completely. However, the larger implications of complexity have what I think of as this larger bridging metaphysical, the general implications that Morin talks about. And to me, that's part of a debate that's been going for years. Absolutely right. The cybernetics stuff, systems thinking, you can track this back. I would argue that Dewey and a lot of the thinkers who were in the 30s were kind of arguing about, and they'd actually been influenced by Einstein's relativity thinking to say, look, the classical universe of one law that reflected Christianity really well. There's one law, order in the universe. All of a sudden that breaks. And they're trying to come to terms with that and how we manage that. So to me, I actually think that's what makes complexity interesting. I would argue quite strongly the word itself will go through another transition. Give it 20 years, there'll be a fresh word for it, and there'll be new techniques involved. But that tension between how do we deal with the orderly bit, how do we deal with conflict, that'll still be there. But there'll be different actors here, and there'll be a different word using in different ways as it goes through different processes. So in a way, I see it as contingent, but to me, there is a base there. There is this sort of foundation that you can draw upon. And in a sense, if you want to restrict it to those, fine, go ahead. But to me, the exciting bit is actually the meta-theoretical.
I would say that the discussion now in public administration, public policy on networks, after 30 years of discussion, comes very close to the basic premises of pragmatism, as you quoted here, learning by doing, experimentation, and so on, and what you said also. So
nevertheless,
that is the management concept. That brings together all those adaptive governance attitudes, instruments, maybe. Influences, communication strategy, and so on. So that is a key word is management in my perception. So it's far from the instrumental discussion. It's about social construction also between actors. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it works partially and then you can go on. Sometimes it fails partially, sometimes it fails totally, and that's it.
But nevertheless, not everything goes. No. We can't experiment everything. We can't test everything. We can't learn everything. You have to choose at the moment what you want to experiment, what you want to test. And
why is that important?
Because space matters. So when you look at Flanders and you look at the mobility problems we have over here, if you look at the extension every day of 5 hectares of new buildings or of new extensions in the countryside. If you look at the ecological footprint of the Belgian households, etc., 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 something matters. So, and there you have, of course, you have to. Once you have to decide, and I agree with you totally that there is not. When I started as a planner in the 1970s, I was working for a government, and the government said, "Okay, look, I want to have a plan," and then I say, "Okay, I'll make you a plan. How much houses I have to build? I can predict how much roads you needed to have, and then." But now I've got not one actor. I've got massive actors, and I have also taken into account what's happening in China and Japan and what Trump is deciding. So that makes it at least difficult, and I think sometimes even complex.
Unless there's another question from the group. I have a question about the history, but you have a question? No? No?
I do have a response though to the discussion, since I'm also quite surprised by the discussion in the sense that, yeah, okay, this world is fuzzy and we are trying to operate it, but I'm quite curious to know also from all of us if then indeed the very well-defined concepts of complexity theory or complexity sciences do not have anything to offer there. I think the concept of feedback loops, the principles which are underlying self-organization, I'm not saying they are new in the sense that other sciences have not developed them, but for planning, really learning how these processes work, I think they can gain us with new insights and also can inform new tools and ways of planning. And that aspect seems to be a bit lost for me so far in the discussion.
Where have you seen that recently that you can benefit from that?
Well, the fact of pattern formation, when we link that to a process of gentrification, for example, a completely decentralized, uncoordinated process of pattern formation, that asks to develop a completely, not completely, because maybe a bit overstated, but at least an adjusted way of dealing with it. Instead of again trying to come up with a kind of zoning or subsidies to implement these processes. No, to detect these processes of spontaneous pattern formation early on, and to see whether we can define conditions or urban codes that guide these processes. I think it really poses new questions. So I'm surprised to not hear that so far.
Okay.
Well, I completely agree with you. Don't get me wrong.
You're right again.
It's highly relevant. That's why we adore nonlinearity. It comes with answers. It creates new insights, definitely.
But only to detect process of self-organization is not enough for me.
No.
And then I see them sometimes, I don't see them sometimes, and I try to induce them myself sometimes, and I delve into it. And when I delve into it, then I see lots of opportunities and possibilities to mold them in a kind of direction which is perhaps more resilient or something like that. And that's what I'm now trying to do in that future alliance of the Oosterweel connection.
Okay.
Where there's the same kind of self-organized. Now, I don't want to say that it is completely. I'm not sure what it is at the moment. Perhaps it is self-organization, but it is a kind of process where people and various actors become important because they have got. They are speaking at this moment with the politician because they have got the power of the referendum, and they've got the power of a Raad van State, a law decision, to say we can use it or we can use it not. and then you have something to negotiate. No? And that is very important that we have to see that. But if I need, perhaps I need a complexity theory for that.
Yeah, but
I'm not sure, but
in this case, it's what is one of the difficulties, but also the exciting things. You talk about gentrification and you see patterning, which is wonderful as a sort of awareness about what's going on. The tools to deal with are still traditional. The tools are very much embedded in a policy making that wants to solve things again, while we would advise maybe you should let things go, or maybe you try to influence a system that is unstoppable. These kinds of responses are very hard to bring forward, because I don't know what the three letters were, but in my time, these guys want to solve it, while it's not always smart. On the contrary, what we also see, which is, I think, now quite an interesting case in the Netherlands, is the opposite. Due to the crisis, where authorities want to retreat because they know they cannot fulfill their responsibilities, the organic growth thing. They create an area in their municipality where you can let things go, where people can build their houses as they like, sort of an autonomous, spontaneous process. Because, let's be fair, they have no plans to fulfill because there's no money anymore. But what happens then is that it's still highly constrained. It is not a self-organizing process. It is a less constrained building plan instead of what was there before. A land use plan that was completely straightforward, fixed and everything. So this is also a difficulty. We have still some work to do explaining politicians how it can be beneficial to think slightly different, while at the same time, look at us. We are struggling ourselves in in-depth understanding what we are talking about, because we get our lessons from physics, but that's easy. This is a pile of grain, and there is an avalanche every now and then. That's interesting. How to do this in a complex environment and talk about social complexity. That is the challenge. We all have a hunch that we are going into the right direction, but what are our tools? Well, for me, that's the fun in academic life.
Yeah. Just real quick, I want to make sure people have a chance. It's also that question, for me, it's that question of balancing and identifying the system or the thing you're looking at. In a sense, the real subtlety. The thing you're looking at, does it need a more ordered structure in a sense, and you're trying to judge how are you going to help? Does it need orderly tactics, if you will, controls, boundaries, etc., or does it need a stimulus of more complexity and uncertainty, organic elements to it? And the example as I said, the example I kept hammering away at because of the centralizing tendency in the UK is generally this push of, let's stretch the boundaries, let's expand. Counter-argument to that would be the American health system. It is so chaotic, it is so disorganized, it is so inherently contradictory that it costs twice as much as the much more ordered, structured systems of national health that are provided in other advanced industrial economies. There, I would go to them saying, actually, you don't need more chaos, you don't need more complexity. What you need is a fundamental order that enables you to get a less expensive.
But that's a negative chaos,
system.
I assume.
So the argument, I mean, there's lots of. I don't want to get too much. I guess in a sense, I see the real core is to say, can you identify the system, or can you look at it? Can you find a point where, in a sense, it's a more balanced system, and what's the right balance, and that has to be decided within the group, please.
I must say that the more I listen, I think that the aspiration to be able to use complexity theory in order to solve specific problems is unrealistic. I mean, it's like the aspiration to use the knowledge of evolution in order to know exactly how this duck will look in 5,000 years. It's impossible. We know that this duck will adapt to the environment. We know the fittest survive, but we don't know exactly how it will look like. So why should we, in the first place, be so linear in our thinking in order to expect complexity to solve our specific problems. Like the way I see it, we know exactly that the principles of complexity are responsible for the quality of the result. We know that if the principles of Ustahol, is this the place that you're talking about? Yes. So if the principles are specific, then the quality, we don't know exactly which house will be built where, but we know the quality of the area. So this is something that we can work on. And it's the same about you mentioned very linear or simple problems. To my view, linear or simple problems are just smaller in the complexity level than the others. It's like when you have an avalanche in a sand pile. Some of the avalanches are really small, some of them are really big. So sometimes you have a lot of small avalanches. About 70% of what you're doing in Flanders, this is what you say, are simple problems.
Yeah, but the complexity comes because of the fact that avalanches don't happen in a lab.
Yes.
The moment you realize that little avalanche is happening in an environment, and you look at what happens because of that, you have the big thing again. So
looking at a small avalanche and saying this is simple is not wise from our point of view. We need to understand that these small avalanches are in a way part of a bigger complex. And we cannot expect ourselves to be able to detect the self-organizing order in each and every system. It is impossible. Some of them we will be able to, but the majority we will not be able to.
So then it's a question of redefining the aspirations of the work that we're doing. What are we aspiring when we're working on this stuff? What are we aspiring? And then this is the broad thing. What are you aspiring when you walk into that room, you see that staff of these 3 departments, and you say, hey, I have done something with complexity over the years. I want to make good use of it. That's asking the question, and continuously asking the question is more important than trying to answer it in a definitive way. That's basically what you're saying also. Yeah.
Okay. And I think we can really understand better the relations between the principles and the result, and the quality of the result. This is something that we can expect. But if we believe in complexity, then we must believe that we cannot predict and we cannot know exactly how to solve problems. It's impossible.
Okay.
But isn't it marvelous that you know this, that you are aware of this? Because look, in the past, you wanted to use a formula. So many people, so many houses, there is your area, and this is ideal, perfect. We've reached the ideal by interfering. Well, you now know there are various views to understand the world. And which clarifies also why implementation of some policies do not work, or work out completely different because they trigger in the context all kinds of events. And you understand why this is, perhaps in retrospect, but nevertheless. So it clarifies so much, which I believe is incredibly enriching. Far more, I think you're far stronger in that respect as a planner than just thinking a linear route is the way to go, which is also one of the routes, but nevertheless, your view is quite
The frustration is, of course, you're much richer, but in some situations that makes you completely helpless, right? Because you're
But it
expected
gives
to
you
have-
an answer in case suddenly something goes completely wrong in the traditional words. Because if you understand a non-linear trajectory after an intervention, you're able to think through certain processes. And you're also able to imagine, how fake that is, imagine what possibly can happen. Well, think about that backwards. This could be a strength, but your perspective as a planner is much stronger, I think.
No?
It's a bit maybe different topic, but I'm really interested in the kind of human aspect. The human aspect which came through in all of what you said, also in your example, the thing that basically we want to do something and allow the uncertainty of the human factor, if you want. So you want to create a process where in the end there's a lot of actors on whatever level doing whatever they do, and you want to allow this uncertainty in. And I'm just interested in this, in the question of how can we, I mean, there's probably some empowerment, but I think, on the one hand, I really agree. On the other hand, this puts all these people into the responsibility they might or might not want to have. So how do we, what is the task there to allow the people to step in and act as an actor or not? So there's something in there which I feel like we all think, yeah, everybody wants that. But maybe they don't. So I just wanted to argue.
Well, that's another reason to let go every now and then. And don't think yourself as the planner of the world, but, you know, in retrospect, you might be the elite. So if people go their own way, they might choose differently than you as a planner might have expected they would, or the politician expected they would.
Or that I would advise you to start with the power analysis in the project you are engaging in. Not everyone is thinking the same as you are suggesting now. Not everyone is thinking. So starts with the power analysis. Also the examples of the spatial planning in Flanders and the examples mentioned there. That is what I miss often in the approach of planners. Start with an analysis of the power behind the project you are engaged in. And institutionalize power also often. And then problems are quite more simple than they look at first sight.
Less
there
complex.
You're moving into the, well, in a sense, I was just going to say at the same time that, yeah, you can look at the power and say to get something done, you know, create whatever the thing it is. Yeah, you might be able to look at the power and you can analyze, okay, if we're going to get something done, I've got to go to actor A. And really, if I can get he or she on side, we can get the thing done. Well, if you're truthful to yourself, I would argue from a complexity frame, and this isn't just a complexity frame, it's also realizing that actually, yeah, you might be able to get it done, but is it the right thing? Is it a good thing? Is it going to lead to the outcomes? Fundamentally, you do have to take this leap into the dark. Whenever you're planning something that's going to have a 10 or 20-year time span, that building may transform its meaning over time. And okay, that's fine. We have to do that every day. And the example I would use, because we were talking about it earlier, was children. I send my children. If you think about, you want those children to have the most opportunities to have a good life, etc. You send them to school. Is it the right school? Are they interacting with the right people? You're trying to create boundaries and yet at the same time, you'll make mistakes. Or you'll see them as mistakes that they'll then learn from and take lessons later. I sent my sons to a vocal comprehensive that wasn't a particularly good school. It was fairly rough. And one of the things my son then tells me that, oh yeah, I figured out how to deal with rough, in a sense, rougher situations, and I'm relaxed and confident in those. And the whole time I was feeling guilty about, oh gosh, I put him into this thing, sort of middle class guilt projecting. And yet the outcome of the actor themselves over time. My only point is to we're making these complex decisions in our lives day after day. And it's just seemed to us as being normal. And that 20th century, the thing I would come back to, I agree completely. There's all these counter tendencies in the 20th century, systems thinking, etc. But there was this underlying, whether you want to call it modernist or order-based vision. So one of my favorite historians, Eric Hobsbawm, wrote 20th century was the century of order. And to me, it was this pursuit, or it was called The Age of Extremes, was the book. But I actually think it was the pursuit of order. It was human beings convinced themselves that they could know the final order. They had a new and powerful thing called the state, linked to new technologies, that they could say, you know what, we'll establish those final orders. And once we have them, we'll have created the final society. And whether that was communism, whether that was Nazism, whether that was free market economics blasted onto the third world that killed enormous numbers of people because we knew the model. We had the brightest people from Harvard, Cambridge, and the smartest people that designed the model. Right, we're going to stick it onto the third world due to the debt crisis in the 1970s and 80s. And I met one of the people who was put in charge of a small country's economy in South America. He had a nervous breakdown after 6 months because he realized the whole thing was crazy. And yet, what is it that enabled us to believe that we could do that? What was it that enabled very, very bright people, the smartest types, and yet that, you know, that period happened? So in a way, I view complexity in a sense, and that always fought out with these other traditions of cybernetics, etc. But if that was the dominant one, to me, complexity, we're going through a phase in history where things like complexity are seen as pretty reasonable, pretty mainstream. But that's the phase of history we're in.
All right, and on that bombshell, as we shall say, we can pause this conversation, because this has been an ongoing conversation for a while. Then it emerged here, and it will go on for at least another 2.5 days, and we'll keep going. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your input. Thank you. And as a friend of mine once said, confusion is the best possible state for an expert to be in. So have a good coffee, have a good confusing conversations.
Confusing.
Wat was jij zuur, man?
Was ik nou weer
Zuur, ja.
gezien? Complexiteit.
Waarom sta je dan op het podium?
Moeten we nog in de ophouden.